Yeah, so this is just a heads up. A little introduction. I don't know if we have newcomers or not, but the European SaMD group is basically a series or a space for regulatory professionals, quality professionals, engineers, anybody working within compliance to basically get together and learn together and basically learn a hands-on knowledge from other regulatory specialists out there in the space. And we're here to build a network, as it's mentioned there, and make regulatory affairs or regulations more transparent and less complicated for everybody. Yes, the resources. You can find us on Meetup, as many of you know. And we have a YouTube channel. We stopped uploading videos there, but if any of you would like to be our sponsor and help us to publish the videos, please go ahead and give us a shout out and we can talk about that. We also have a LinkedIn presence as a group called European SaMD Meetup. So follow us if you like to keep in touch with us. How you can help? We will send a feedback form. I think I sent it to everybody who was attending on Meetup. But anyway, I will provide it at the end of the Meetup. I will give you a feedback form. Please give us some feedback so we make the meeting better and we know what topics would you like to discuss. Share our events and videos on social media, talk about them, and if there are any sponsors there that would like to sponsor the Meetup, we are also, as I mentioned, happy to discuss. Please, you can find us on LinkedIn and send us a message. And lastly, you can help us by giving a talk or help us find speakers. So there are a few topics that you would like to talk about and you think you're the right person, please let us know and we can have you on next Meetup. All right, so the agenda for today, we would be speaking, or mainly Ivo would be speaking about threat modeling. These are the bullet points. So we will talk about cybersecurity requirements and deliverables, threat modeling, security testing, and vulnerability monitoring, and the SBOM. At the end, we will have a Q&A. So we have an open floor for you to ask questions. Some of the housekeeping rules, I would kindly ask you to write your Q&As in the Q&A section here in the meeting. And I would read them one by one at the end of the Meetup. So we keep this organized and structured. So the organizers, I'm going to speak about myself. I'm Lara. I'm a quality regulatory manager at Hemato. I have a bachelor in pharmacy and an MBA in life science management. I've been in the space for 5 to 6 years, ranging from regulatory to quality roles. And I joined the group to expand my knowledge and get to know other professionals in the field and get hands-on experience. And now I give the floor to Ivo, so you can present yourself and start with the presentation.
Yeah, but I will switch to the actual presentation, and it also has an intro slide, so I will use that one instead. Just need to find the right tab. And apologies if you hear screaming in the background. My kids want to kill each other. But that's live. Great background noise. So what is my background? I have over 10 years of experience working in software as a medical device. Last year I started consulting, and since this year I'm a co-founder at MedTech, together with Leon Doorn, who is also in this meetup at the moment. We provide consulting services in quality management and regulatory affairs. And over, at least in the past year, I've helped several companies with cybersecurity. So that's definitely one of my specialties, which is why I'm here today. So on the left, like when I did my last 510K in 2021, it was mainly, you have a risk management report and you did your threat modeling and everything was linked, and maybe you wrote up a nice report about it. And now on the right, I'm going to list up the things that you should be doing as of last year. So it's still the same things as before, but now you need to start including your SBOM, for the SBOM. We want to know the end of life for all the items in there. And I got bored of clicking so many times. So here's the whole list, but you also need to check them for vulnerabilities, assess any remaining unresolved anomalies, have some metrics on how fast you solve things, have architecture views, way more extensive testing, include stuff in your labeling. So the amount of work has really increased dramatically in the past year. Note this is mainly the perspective of the FDA. So if you're in Europe, you're somewhat in luck that the notified bodies haven't catched on that much yet. But I do see movement that they are starting to expect the same type of things. The difference is, though, that the FDA, they have their guidance on cybersecurity, and a lot of things, it's called guidance, but it's really almost mandatory. So I've seen several, they get a deficiency letter first that you don't have anything or not enough. But even after doing substantial amounts of work, the FDA can still come back to you and say that you're not doing enough. So warning for everyone, if you're going to the US, take it seriously and truly try to do as many of the things as possible. And now for today, to start with threat modeling, we typically I'd like to start with making a data flow model. So here I have this completely fictional device that was inspired of one of my clients. So it's a medical imaging company. In the top right here, you see there's a hospital network, there's a PACS installed there, and there's some software of the medical device running in the hospital. And they have a cloud component where you do your segmentation and some calculations and whatnot. And then on the user's machine, it's running a web UI that is loading data from the cloud. So this is like the maybe similar to what you would normally have in your architecture diagrams, probably with more lines between them. And then when turning this into a data flow diagram, there's a MITRE playbook about how to do this. They recommend that you identify the following components. So things like, where is data being stored? So if we look here, DICOM images are originally stored inside the PACS. We also store them inside the cloud. And then maybe segmentation results are stored separately. Here there's a cache where we temporarily store data. Then there are various processes. These are things where you interact with data, change things, or perform actions. So we upload data, we segment data, we receive it, we send it, we have our user interface, things like that. There are trust boundaries, and in some sense you could put way more trust boundaries on there, but I try to delineate where data moves from one component to the other. So here there's a big trust boundary, everything inside the hospital network. Then there's a PACS inside the PACS, inside or around it. There's also a trust boundary where data goes from the PACS to some other entity. Here, these are separate because at least for this client, this was truly separated. But this could also just be one big monolithic part. It goes to our own cloud, which is also a big trust boundary. And here in this case, these are separate state virtual machines. So each virtual machine is also its own trust boundary. But again, this could also just be more a monolithic application. I see I have my BBC moment where my kids are crashing my presentation. And then lastly, another trust boundary here, for example, around the user's machine. And data flows between all these components. So data flows from the PACS towards the application of the medical device. It never flows back because we just keep our own copies. It's transferred here from the cloud to, or from the hospital to our cloud. Inside goes into this circle. And ultimately here it goes back and forth because interactions of the user, they get the data, then they interact with it and send data back. And I would typically expect you to write maybe what ports are you exposing? Is this communication via HTTPS or plain HTTP? Maybe you're using Wi-Fi or other communication technology that you would also list it here. And then entities are, for this analysis, typically anything outside of your device that interacts with your system. So from the perspective of this data flow diagram, the packet is external to us, it's sending data to us, and even the user's machine to some extent is an external thing, even though it's running our software. And then lastly, a category that we look at are users. So in this diagram, it's just the end user interacting with it, but maybe you would also include your own company that interacts with the software that's running in the hospital because you need to perform installation or servicing on it. Maybe if you have people who need to do the segmentation manually, that happens inside your company, then there would also be users in here. Then now that we have a model like this, we would start to identify threats that we see. And I like to use the acronym STRIDE, which I believe was coined by Microsoft. It stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And they each look at a different aspect of what could happen. So spoofing is when somebody acts as if they are you. So in the diagram we just looked at, it would maybe be you try to act as you are a user of the device, or something tries to act like they are the PACS inside the hospital sending data to our medical device there. Tampering is when data is transferred across the network, and maybe someone is listening to your network traffic and then meddling with the data that you're transferring. Or there's malware running on the end user's laptop, and it is messing with the script of your web UI. Repudiation is probably not something that people think about a lot, but it is when, say, someone is performed an action, they deleted some kind of important data, and they say, oh, I didn't do it. And then you have audit logs where you can show that they actually did indeed perform such an action. Information disclosure is like anytime someone has access to the information that we don't want them to, like hackers stealing the DICOM data would be such an instance. Denial of service would be, say, we send data from the hospital to the cloud, that API is open to the public internet. What if some botnet starts making tons and tons of requests and basically overloading our servers? That would be an example. Or inside the hospital, if something starts sending way too much DICOM to our system, that could be another. An elevation of privilege, it of course depends on whether your system even has a concept of privilege or different roles. But if someone is allowed to take actions, say, on behalf of an admin, even though they are not an admin themselves. And here on the side, there are also a list of controls that the FDA recommends that you take. They have more, but they give you an idea of these are some of the things they think you should be thinking about, and you should try to incorporate them into your software. And then when you come, I want to go back to the threat model in a moment to come up with some examples together with you all. But after we come up with these things, we have to give them a score. And I like to use the CVSS score. There's an online calculator that you can go to, and it has all these variables. You plug them in, and out comes a score. You can generally map these values to a 5-point scale. Here you can see, for example, the top one is probably the most important one. If a device is network enabled, anything attached to a network that can be attacked by someone through the network is going to have a higher CVSS score in general. But then there are things, is it very easy to pull it off, or is it a very complex series of steps that require special skills? Are there any requirements that a vulnerability has to be present for it to be pulled off or not? Do they require any privileges? None is like, you can always do this. None, low would be maybe you have to be a regular user. And maybe high, you have to have admin privileges in order to pull off this thing. And then user interactions, like none, it would be, you could just come knock on this server and you could pull it off every time. Passive is that maybe the user just needs to log in and then you can do it. And for active, maybe you have to coax him into actually clicking on a button for it to pull it off. I'm sure that actual or other cybersecurity specialists would sometimes differ in the scores that they assign. So I'm definitely convinced that this is more an art than a science. But I think generally, if within your company, you should have some discussions to make sure that you roughly land on the same types of answers and outcomes to score. And then below here, there's the CIA triad from information security, where we give it an impact. So in some sense, your CVSS score is both like how easily is this step performed, and a metric of how bad it is. But I would generally still recommend that you also assign your own impact score, say on a 1 to 5 scale separately, even though it's already part. So if you set everything to none, you're going to have a lower CVSS score, but it's generally not going to be 0, even though that might be what you're expecting. So by adding another layer of assessing your own impact separately, you can further reduce your risk levels somewhat. Typically, these scores can be quite high. So say if we go to the example we just had, we have let me jump through an example here. Here, data is going from the hospital to the cloud. This is number 3. This is a network connection. Anyone could do it because it's so it doesn't use any interaction. It's not very complex. It's just an HTTP request. So you can see like these scores are on a 10-point scale quite high, and I will say you should not be too worried about it. Any of these CVSS scores before you start applying controls are generally quickly going to be or look quite bad. Focus on, you will start applying various controls, and then the goal is to get that score into an acceptable range, either by lessening the severity, which is often hard. You cannot, if you have to transfer medical data, you cannot stop transferring medical data. So the severity will probably remain, but you can definitely try to reduce the exploitability, that it will generally not be possible anymore. And one of the most important things is that you want to prevent them from that network component, that it becomes something unique, physical access to the server in order to pull it off. And of course, even if you implement all sorts of controls, there is still a network connection. They are just no longer able to exploit that network connection, which is why you can move to the right towards, say, local or something else. And now I want to just stop for a moment, and maybe we're not with too many people, so we should be able to do this somewhat interactively. I want to hear some people if they have ideas, apart from the 3 examples you can see on the slide, like what kind of threats you could in this hypothetical scenarios. And maybe if somebody wants to share an idea, raise your hand or share it in the chat. Anyone? Bart, go ahead.
Yeah, it was so quiet, so I volunteered to give it a shot. I could think of things related to like the user's machine, where users have to authenticate. So things like privilege escalation, where a user has more permissions than they should actually have, or can, through some sort of unprotected endpoint, can increase or elevate their permissions.
I've asked one of our colleagues, Maurice, if he's taking notes. So if you can take note, we can come back to this later to then take your example as well, to see if we can come up with some controls for this example as well. Do you have any other things that immediately come to mind?
Yeah, well, you already mentioned it, but obviously when you have a hospital network and you send data to a cloud, that endpoint in the cloud should also be protected. So in the sense that it could be vulnerable to distributed denial of service. So you can try to send a lot of traffic to that endpoint, or even to the DNS server that is behind that endpoint or in front of that endpoint. So there's threats there that I can see. Yeah, and other things like tampering with the data, like you already said. Those I would also think are definitely on the list of things that you should want to control.
Yeah, so here for this presentation, the other examples I have is that maybe somebody acts as if they are the DICOM uploader and intercepts the data somehow, which I admit is somewhat out there, but or maybe it could happen over here that you coax the PACS into sending data to you that it shouldn't. A very common thing is that the PACS is sending data to your medical device. If this is an unencrypted connection, anyone else on the network could also try to intercept it. Here, if the hospital says, I didn't send that to your device, if you don't have logs, you cannot prove how something like that happened. And anywhere where you transfer data, people can try to tamper with it. So here I added some mock CVSS scores. I'm sharing my window, right? So we could try to go to the CVSS calculator. So it's a network-based attack. If we're concerned about people, so say we take this example, we're transferring DICOM from the hospital to our cloud. So it's network-based. It's not very complex if you can somehow intercept this network traffic. Admittedly, I don't know exactly where you would need to be to intercept the traffic from our device to the network, but maybe you're also on the hospital network, for example. Does it have any special conditions that need to be present? I mean, if you can snoop on the network traffic, and you don't need any privileges, though you do need to be on the network, and it doesn't require any user interaction, and you would get like a CVSS score of 9.3 already. Now, granted, I'm not saying that this is likely to happen, but if you are on that network, that something like this, without any controls on our part, would definitely be a possibility. And some other suggestions. So here we're tampering with DICOM data. That can also cause us to display incorrect information, which could cause our users to, and we haven't discussed what kind of application this is, but maybe you're a planning solution and you plan the wrong treatment, or you plan it on they change the side to the other side and they start planning the wrong side of the patient. And you should use the outcome of this to prioritize your risks. So the ones that are high obviously deserve your attention sooner rather than any low risk ones. And to some extent, it's somewhat different, I would say, from a safety analysis. That with security, if it's a high risk, there are more options available to you, or it's like the threat is high risk, that there are more options available. You could share it with your user. You could buy insurance, so you need not always fix every problem. Where with safety, if something is unacceptable, you would always have to take some kind of action to lower that risk. Then we start coming up with controls. So here again, I mean, it's just a fictional example. I can come up with whatever I want. So maybe for the first risk, it was the one about spoofing on our network. We can have network segmentation, so nobody is on our network. We can employ end-to-end encryption, so you cannot be in the middle as easily. Otherwise, I would not accept your traffic. Maybe add some kind of authentication. For the repudiation, you could implement logging, have some kind of auditing mechanism on various actions that are being performed. And here for the transfer between the cloud and the hospital and the cloud, you could employ TLS to encrypt your connection, or have some kind of integrity check to make sure that the DICOM is still the same after it's being transferred. And then maybe Bart, for your example, any suggestions? Are you speaking from experience?
Yes. Also the previous escalation one, by the way, but that was fortunately not a medical device.
And what did you do about that specific one?
That was an application that I had pen tested, and I had an agreement with the pen testers that they would call me in case there was anything like critical. But I got a call within 1 minute of the, the pen test. I had a form that wasn't properly validated, so it was a user form where you could modify user properties, And you could, by just going into the underlying JavaScript, you could modify the parameters sent to the server, giving you admin permission. So that was something that was
is indeed quite bad. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it's definitely on the end of testing where you make sure that these kind of things can't happen. And in terms of like controls, yeah, making sure that you apply least privilege, I would say.
I think this also like you could also, a lot of companies have ISO 27001 set up, which I think will definitely help you do some of these things. So it will probably force you to set up logging and actually bother to monitor those logs. You will do things like have access control on anything. So people, if you're not supposed to have access, you don't have access. Not everyone developer is going to have root access to and the entire cloud and access all the patient data, for example. You will set up things like backups and think about business continuity. But in terms of making your device more secure, ISO 27001 is not necessarily going to force you to do these things. So yes, network controls are gonna probably pop up, and encryption, but coming up with actual secure requirements, ISO 27001 just says you should have a secure architecture and you should have security requirements. It does not specify what these are. So you would still need to do an analysis like this to actually find what you specifically need to do for each application that you build. So while I think ISO 27001 for a lot of companies, especially if you have an architecture like this, I think your clients are almost certainly going to ask that you have ISO 27001. It is definitely not going to be enough on its own to just have something like that, but I think it is useful to have. Then once you have all these controls, you also need to start testing them. And I mean, there's a lot of overlap between some of these things. There are testing, in this case, like, did I implement my control? Yes or no. But there are also types of testing. Simply having a piece of software. There are various vendors available that just look at the source code and see if you're using insecure coding patterns. And surely there are going to be lots of false positives where you know what you are doing and it is actually safe in your context. But a lot of times there are also just examples like Bart was just giving, things where you do something that you probably something reviewing your code could have said, this looks insecure to me. If you're lucky enough to have a device that is connected to the web, there are lots of dynamic solutions available, like all the tools that the penetration testers are using. A lot of them are just open source. Anyone can download them and try them yourself. Metasploit, Nmap, Burp Suite. You do need someone with some knowledge in order to be able to use them, but you can, like the test that Bart was describing, the fact that he got a call that quickly, to me shows they just turned on one of those tools and it immediately, almost automatically exploited this, which is also why, you know, any thing that allows for network-based attacks, it is truly that easy that they just turn on a tool and it will just start telling you all the ways in which it's broken if you leave some of these doors open. If you're fortunate enough to have, say, a desktop application, a mobile app, or an embedded application, you might be in less luck. And FDA is still going to demand that you do some kind of dynamic testing, even though that such software is typically not commercially available. So you might be somewhat in a pickle there. Then an alternative could be to have penetration tests done where somebody else tries to exercise your software. Also, those come into various flavors. You can have someone use the tools that I just mentioned, but they could also try to decompile your software and start rummaging through your source code to find things like, are you using hard-coded passwords? Are your algorithms secure enough? Those types of things. And I mean, for some people, they have to go to penetration testing because they cannot do any dynamic testing themselves. But I think you'll be pretty hard-pressed to come up with a good argument not to do any type of penetration testing. we've seen several. I don't know. Has any one of you had any penetration tests done, say, in the past couple of years? Not all at once. Well, Bart, of course.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. What was your cost on average, or like a ballpark?
But it depends a lot on the type of test. But we did a gray box, very basic OWASP top 10 test. Also, given the attack surface that we have, I think it was less than €1,000. But that, like you said, it's mainly automated scripts that they run, and not a whole lot came out of the test. So they do check like SSL certificates for the HTTP connection, those kind of things. But it wasn't really that in depth.
Yeah. Jouke is commenting, I've seen ranges for 4K to 50K. I would agree that I've seen numbers that are just ridiculous to mention. But I mean, I've seen numbers like 9K, 15K. I mean, they are reasonable for the scope that you are getting. Like, you have a person with a very healthy hourly wage. It takes him 5 or maybe even 10 days, and those numbers are to be expected. Of course, using reputable companies is never a bad thing, I would say, though paying a lot of money is not a guarantee that you will get a good test. In the past year, I've had quite good experience with a couple of Indian companies, which, as you can expect, were a lot more affordable. I've had tests that were in the range of €2,500 to €4,000. And I think the €4,000 test was like a 10-day test. So we really got our money's worth, I feel. And both of them were for FDA. So at least there's not necessarily a prejudice yet against using, say, foreign organizations for these types of tests. So especially if you're a pre-market company, I would highly recommend just get a penetration test done. If it's a choice between having one done at all or not at all, then you're probably better off setting up or using a cheaper service. And Miguel is commenting that he's setting up a penetration testing service. I look forward to seeing how that works. But of course, you also need to do your own internal testing of all these things. Make sure that you have all your controls verified, that they're implemented, and hopefully have some kind of evidence that they're actually effective. And in some cases, if you cannot test them, provide a rationale. So some of these things, they are, you do not segment the network of the hospital does, but maybe you add a clause that you need to include this in your contract, or that the contracts need to be checked, or other controls as well. Then another thing, this is becoming a hot topic. Personally, I'm very interested in it. If only it's such low-hanging fruit, yet almost every company I interact with right now is not yet doing all that they can. That is quite easy. So software bill of materials is like a machine-readable list, like JSON or XML, of all the components that are in your software. So say you're using Python, you have a requirements.txt file, or maybe some kind of log file, and the SBOM would be quite similar. It contains just a list of all the packages that are in there, their versions, hopefully some other metadata, like who is making this, and some other information. But it could also contain your own components. And what you can do with this is you can run it through various tools, like say Gripe, Dependency Track, Snike Code. There are loads of services available for this, and they will look in various databases if any of those components have any known vulnerabilities in them. And they will give you a CVSS score of how bad they think that problem is going to be, and it gives you some information on whether you should be upgrading this component. And I really like this diagram that you see here in the top right, where everybody's software is running here on top of a gigantic stack of often open source components. And then something at the bottom here is like a critical component. But what if this has a critical vulnerability? Everybody else on top of it is relying on that component doing its thing, and this person is doing a very unthankful job maintaining this probably for many years. And this is typically where your problems are. And sometimes, say if we look at the medical imaging example, you are interacting with DICOM, you are using, say, PyDICOM to interact with those images, but PyDICOM under the hood uses various C++ libraries to actually read the DICOM data. And your SBOM most likely is not going to contain this type of information, even though those C++ components are the ones that will have memory errors that could lead to various problems. So even if you do this method, it's not a guarantee that your SBOM is correct or that it will find everything. But for everything that it does find, you really, really should be doing something about it. And there's almost no excuse for not trying to do something with it. The FDA also requires you to document pieces of information that these tools are currently at least not containing. What is the level of support of this open source piece of software? Well, in general, you do not have any support. So the best you can typically do is go to, say, their GitHub repo or wherever they write their code and look at how many releases have they been doing in the past year. How active is their issue tracker? Are those bugs ever getting closed, or is the pull request number and issue number just going up? If there haven't been any releases in the past 3 years and they find a critical vulnerability, what are your chances that you're going to get an update? There are also other examples, like especially in the JavaScript community, things can move really, really fast. And say you're using Vue, there are loads of vulnerabilities are found because it's a very popular framework, and they move to Vue 3, but they make tons of breaking changes. Are you ready to upgrade your entire web front end to move to the latest and greatest? So also there you need to start looking into this information to see if you're making the right choices in the components that you're using, and make informed choices if you want to stay on some of these technologies, or if they're moving at a pace that is probably more sustainable for you. And then if there are reported vulnerabilities, and they might have identifiers like you see here, and they will assign a CVSS score to it, but the incentives of the person coming up with these CVSS scores does not align with you. This person wants to have all critical vulnerabilities because it's great for his reputation as a security researcher. But just because it's, if you install this package and you just use it for whatever, then potentially the exploitability could be really high. But a lot of these things rely on processing arbitrary inputs, which your medical device, heavens forbid, hopefully never does. So there are lots of things that are more of a false positive, or that is not as exploitable for you as they are reported. So I would always encourage you, write down whatever the database mentioned, but then do your own assessment and basically give your own score to it as a somewhat easier way of justifying why you may choose not to upgrade certain components. Though in general, if you're doing a 510K submission, try to make sure that this list is just empty as much as possible when you do your submission, because if you were to show me this now, the presentation contains older material, but 3.7 is very much end of life. You should not be submitting a 510K that's still using at this point an end of life version of Python. I would expect you to be using maybe not the latest and greatest, but at least something that is well within the maintenance window. And then if you are either unable because it wasn't fixed yet and you don't have a replacement, or maybe it is the risk is acceptable to you, you should include these vulnerabilities in your unresolved anomalies, whether that is by making them into like security risks that you assess, or as bugs. I mean, there are multiple ways of approaching this. I personally would probably treat them as bugs, and then hopefully in a future release be able to update all of them and then close all my bugs, rather than them lingering around. Yeah, we had this was a vulnerability in an older version, and now I have to remove the risk. I personally don't like that too much. Another thing that the FDA wants you to define cybersecurity metrics. They should be measurable. They should give you an idea if your processes are working. And of course, new devices often don't have any of these numbers when you just start out. But maybe you can lean on other devices that you're working on to give a sense of a baseline. And the three that the FDA wants you to consider are, what is the percentage of vulnerabilities that you have? I think maybe like, say you have an SBOM, there are 50 components in them. How many of them have active vulnerabilities in them? And you want it probably to be pretty low, which is not an excuse to have thousands of components. You'll live to regret it, but try to make sure that you don't have hundreds of vulnerabilities if possible. What was the time between identifying it and releasing the patch? But also what was the time between patching it and actually getting it onto the market? And those may be two very different things. You could have released a fix, but have it lying on the shelf and not actually get it into hands of users. And say you run on-prem, you can quickly release an update, but installing, say, 300 installations that each take an hour is just not something that is going to happen overnight. So it makes sense to keep these as separate things that you measure. And you also have to, like, up until now, most of it was all work that you were doing pre-market, but you also have to think about what you're going to do post-market. How are you going to handle those vulnerabilities that are still there? What are you going to do about fixing them? Do you have any procedures or methods? Like, how are you going to keep tabs of this? And here, I think a lot of companies make the mistake. They set up their CI, and the software developers are always looking, we're looking at the vulnerabilities in the latest version that you are developing. But say I made a device, I released it last month. I keep working on the new version that I'm still monitoring, but that version that was just released, you should also keep monitoring if the components that are in that version have any vulnerabilities. And if it depends on what kind of model you have, but maybe you have 5 versions of your device active worldwide, then you should be checking each of those versions, whether they have vulnerabilities. And this is at least not typical how companies are set up. But there are some solutions that can, you take your SBOM, you upload them in these programs, and then they can notify you if any of the other, if any of these versions have any vulnerabilities in them. And then you should figure out whether you make them upgrade to a version that doesn't have any vulnerabilities, or if you have to somehow patch these older versions depending on your process. Certain tests need to be repeated regularly because the ecosystem moves underneath you. Maybe you've done, you've implemented new features, you've swapped out components, and who's to say that everything was still configured securely? So maybe consider doing a pen test every year or in a defined period. Maybe repeat certain security tests with some regularity. And not just, we haven't changed the code, so I'm not touching it, is probably not the best idea. And also defining what is your guideline for how quickly am I going to patch it? How bad does something need to be? Do you patch something of critical severity in 7 days, in 30 days? At least define something. But also make sure that you don't define it in a way that you are immediately not complying with your own plan. So it should not be come across as if you're lazy or that you don't want to do anything, but it should also not be overly ambitious and that you always fail to meet your own deadlines. And then think about how are you going to update. So I would highly recommend almost anyone try to do a release, say every 3 months. Just update all your dependencies to the most current versions. Because if something was released yesterday, chances are they didn't find a vulnerability in it yet, and it buys you time until a vulnerability is detected. Which is, of course, somewhat a fake sense of security, because there could be plenty of unknown vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited, but at least they won't be able to exploit anything that is known. if you are staying up to date. And it also gets you in the habit of just going through the motions of at least doing cybersecurity fixes much more regularly. And you may need to make design changes in order to accommodate this. And also think about, like with the on-prem situation, how are you going to make sure that your users regularly install these updates then as well? And lastly, you have something like a vulnerability disclosure process. Both, let's say there is a critical vulnerability, you may need to notify your users about this process, but also the other way around. If a security researcher finds a problem in your device, give them a way to contact you and provide you with this information. And then in the end, try to make a big report listing all this information. What I've noticed from some recent interactions with the FDA, at least, they have dedicated cybersecurity specialists looking at this stuff. They clearly know their stuff from, pinpointing very specific things in what was written, but they will probably not have access to all the documents. Don't make them search around as many of your documents as you would with some of your other reviewers. Just try to give them a big document that contains all the information they would need. So include your, you can have references to, say, your threat modeling analysis in a separate document, and your SBOM might be an attachment. But in general, try to cover everything and explain them where they can find all the bits and pieces that they would need in order to do their analysis. And that was it for my presentation. Any questions? No questions. Well, that's great. But then I'm sure we can have just an open discussion on whatever we want. I know Miguel shared some things. Go ahead, Miguel.
No, you opening to the discussion, and I think we are here with the community of practice. No, not necessarily. You don't need to sell cybersecurity to most of the team people here, so we know that it's the needs. So I bring the challenge is how can we push this kind of adoption of cybersecurity mentality to our teams or our clients? Because many of the cases, just for them to understand what is risk is a challenge. For them to really embrace this kind of things. I don't see how you can do it without really embracing digital tools and automation and good practice, as this becomes quite overwhelming for most of the people down the road. So it's more here a philosophical question.
Leon is commenting failed FDA clearances. Definitely some of them, I think at least two of the clients are they are in the submission process, and then they get feedback, you haven't done anything for cybersecurity, is a wake-up call for them. And especially maybe they had experience pre the latest E-Star, and they thought, this should be enough. Well, newsflash, it's not. And then suddenly there's a lot more awareness. In general, you would want them to please be a bit more proactive. It's a lot cheap. I know you have these graphs of fixing a bug early is cheaper than fixing it later. With security, I'd say it's even worse. Start early and you can re-architect or architecture a thing in a more secure way and save you lots of re-engineering afterwards. And sometimes organizations come knocking when they already spent their entire budget on making the software, and only then they realize, we have to do something about cybersecurity. That's not the best moment to start thinking about it. And that's part of the reason why I think I at least suggested let's have this topic for this meetup, to raise awareness. You may think you know what you have to do, but take it more seriously. You will not get clearance if you don't take this seriously. And I think so. I have one PMA that ultimately got through all the work that they had to do, but we had them do a lot of work. They did 2 separate pen tests. They started from having literally nothing to having done a threat modeling analysis, adding static testing, having dynamic testing done, 2 penetration tests, implementing a boatload of new controls, that were all verified. And even then, FDA still came back, oh, you did so much, but your logs are not good. Why don't you have code signing? Why don't you have this? It's like, we came from having nothing. We implemented all these extra things, and it's still not enough. Go ahead, Bart. Oh,
just a quick question, but was that work done after FDA first said, okay, you have nothing, or
yeah, so they first said you have nothing. We took them through the process. We did a lot of things. We basically added like 30 requirements of hardening the PC, doing all sorts of setting up access control, improving password stuff. And then still it was not enough. Let's first go to Bart. Go ahead, Bart.
I can sense a bit of your frustration in the process through sharing your experience. I was wondering, we have a software as a medical device that is partially based in the cloud and partially based on premise. So on premise, you indeed have controls that you have to enforce through a contract, but also there's a bit of configuration involved, which has to be repeated for every site. I'm always struggling to find out the usefulness of pen tests in this architecture, because you can do a pen test and you use your testing environment as the subject of the pen test. But we have said now that for every installation, and we have a nice deal with the pen testing company, for every installation on site, we will also have a specific pen test to make sure that we configured it properly for that specific site. But it's like, of course, cost-wise, it's not really interesting to do it like that.
Yeah, I think it is a tough situation, and I'm sure there are practical and technical reasons why you cannot standardize more, because every client is different, and they use different technologies that you have to integrate with, or their whole setup is different. But and I mean, that's also part of why in some cases it's nicer to go to the cloud, where you can control everything in one central place, make sure that you actually secure it, rather than having all these special cases. But no, I think you're in a tough situation, to be honest. Does anyone else have any recommendations for Bart?
The strategy is a bit to try to automate the self-test or the security testing as part of our installation procedure. So yeah, we don't always have to ask that pen test company, at least once we get some experience with what they're actually doing, we might be able to include them in our installation procedure ourselves. So that is sort of the longer term strategy that I'm looking at.
And to be honest, to somewhat degree, it's somewhat of a pet peeve of mine. But when it comes to, say, safety of the device, we do all our verification testing ourselves. We do validation with actual people that are maybe externally, but we are probably ones executing it. We don't necessarily, for most medical devices, we don't have to get an external company to do this. Why is penetration testing so different that you must use an external company? I think it mostly has to do that people lack the qualifications, experience, etc., in order to do it. But I mean, I've taken several Udemy courses on penetration testing, and I mean, I'm still a beginner, but I feel I can be quite dangerous. And the things that I learned from how easy it is to pull off some of these things, and like give your team members the right tools, and they could probably indeed check at least some of these configurations yourself, and make sure that you, like the situation you were describing earlier, that's something that you could check in the future yourself to make sure that you don't misconfigure forms on your website, for example.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
I just want to get Leon had raised his hand a bit longer. Go ahead, Leon.
Yeah, only to ask you, Ivo, is on your topic that you mentioned of one customer where we went through the PMA clearance. Maybe it's also interesting to note that manufacturer is not even a manufacturer of software medical devices, but they use a lab equipment, and they provide the lab equipment that is required to run their product, which is an IVD. And their FDA went all berserk over having all the cybersecurity aspects covered for all the equipment that's delivered along with the actual test assay that they manufacture, which they were completely unprepared for, to also assess the cybersecurity risks of the associated equipment, which FDA started pushing on, where they're not even the manufacturer for. Just correct me if I'm saying something wrong, Ivo.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, it also feels somewhat unfair. I mean, if you know about how other companies are doing it. It's like I just give them an installer and I ask them to run it. They are responsible for securing their own computer, and it's like hands off. They provide the computer, and suddenly it's like, oh, you're bringing a device into the hospital. Now you have to lock it down completely, even though the client may be asking you to please let me also run this other application that I need. Otherwise, I don't want 1,000 computers in my lab. So it's there's a definite tension there, and I think FDA at times is just being a little bit unreasonable lately. And maybe, we don't have any American people on the call, I think, today. I'm wondering at times if there's a bias against those Europeans that, they're just using it as a competitive advantage. I don't know. Go ahead, Miguel.
No, American first. I just wanted to I share here a bit of what we are doing with a partner on this continuous penetration test, because you were mentioning a bit on the how this should be a continuous work, and definitely these guys are using AI to replicate the part of the work that is done by the human and keep as an ongoing work, because the challenge with software is change every month. So unless you really stop developing anything, the penetration test may no longer be valid. Just one month from now. And this cybersecurity, I think you're really to the point that we often forget that cybersecurity is a continuous process. And we are really looking how can we bring a bit more of this kind of continuous testing practice to the healthcare markets, especially with hospitals and so on. It becomes quite a nightmare if you just rely on a single point analysis.
Yeah, what I saw. No, go ahead.
No, I was saying, and there's a lot of evolving in this field. Like we are just now doing a research project on AI security issues. That's just where LLMs bring a whole new level of things that will be missing, like prompt injections and so on. There are things that most of the tools are not even ready to cover, and will be a new challenge down the road.
Yeah, in that sense, all that MCP work is just, are you really, really sure that you want to give LLMs with no control access to all your buttons and all your applications just like that? Yeah, we'll see. What I saw at one of my clients, they are based in Switzerland, and you have to fill in these questionnaires. And then having some experience with the 27001 and cybersecurity, it is quite clear that these hospitals are like assuming that don't trust any of the suppliers. Everything is locked down very much, which I think is also like the only sane approach. So a lot of these analyses will make it sound like your medical device is just in a hostile network in the hospital. But my estimation is that there is no device on that network at all that is not known by the hospital, or the network is configured in a way that device, cannot do anything. So the environment is hopefully a lot safer. But of course, there's no guarantee that every hospital is configured like this, which I think ties into Bart's point a little bit, that everyone is their unique snowflake. And while some have it configured top-notch, that's not a guarantee that everyone has it that way. Anyone else have any experiences that they want to share about? Questions? Then we have two options. Either Miguel and I keep going through other examples that we think are interesting, or we call it a night a bit sooner than normal. Any votes? See you next time, Jouke. Thanks for being here. Bart suggests let's calling it. So thanks everyone for being here. And if you have suggestions for next time, let us know in Open Regulatory Slack, or fill in the form that Lara shared, and let us know what you thought of today. And thanks for your attention.
Thanks for the presentation, and thanks for hosting, Lara.
Bye,
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Nice having you.